The Boy Who Lost His Face by Louis Sachar. 7. David didn't think his mother actually meant don't move. She was just too upset to choose her words properly. He had to stay in his room until his father came home. But surely he was allowed to move. Unfortunately, his father sometimes didn't get home until almost after midnight. He worked in a lab at the university and would get so involved with his experiments that he'd forget all about time. David didn't know exactly what his father did, except that he was sort of working on a cure for cancer, but not really. His father tried to explain his work to him slowly and simply, but then he'd always get carried away and start talking real fast about cutting and cloning and splicing DNA molecules. He could go on for half an hour before realizing that David had no idea what he was talking about. Then he'd just shrug and say, "I'm working on a cure for cancer." But David had also heard his father say that the only way to get a government grant was to say he was working on a cure for cancer. True, he hoped his research might eventually lead to a discovery that might help lead to a cure for cancer, but that wasn't really the main thing. Ricky brought David his dinner on a tray. "I'm not supposed to talk to you," he said. "I'm just supposed to give you your dinner, then go right back to the kitchen." "Okay," said David, lying on top of his bed. Ricky set the tray on David's desk and started toward the door, then stopped and walked quickly to his brother. "What do you do?" he whispered. David shook his head. He was too ashamed to tell Ricky he'd given their mother the finger. But once again, he knew he had impressed his little brother. Here he was, eating alone in his room because of some great and mysterious thing he had done. "Maybe I really am cursed," he thought, picking at his dinner. "I've got no friends. My mother hates me." In an odd way, it made him feel better to pretend to believe Mrs. Bayfield put a curse on him. It gave him an excuse. "It's not my fault I'm a dipshit. There's a curse on me." The door opened. His father entered, took one look at him and shook his head. "I'm sorry," said David. "Don't tell me," said his father, sitting on the bed. "Tell your mother." He wore torn jeans and a t-shirt. This was how he dressed for work, unless he had to meet with somebody from the government, and then he wore a suit and tie. He had very curly hair like David's, but his hairline was receding. He also had a scraggly beard and mustache. "I didn't think she'd know what it meant," David tried to explain. His father stared at him incredulously. "Who told her what it meant?" David asked. "Did you?" "No." "Then how does she know? Somebody had to show it to her and then tell her what it meant." "I suppose you're right." "How'd she tell you what I did?" asked David. "What'd she call it?" His father thought a moment. "She didn't call it anything. She said, 'David did this to me,' and then she showed me." "Was she very good at it?" asked David. "Good at it? I mean, was she able to do it easily?" His father smiled. "No, actually, she had to use her other hand to bend her fingers into place. I just thought, Mom seems so pure and innocent and everything. I didn't know she'd know what it meant." "Well, that's not the point," said his father. "Even if she didn't know what it meant, that still wouldn't excuse your actions." "Why not?" asked David. "If you give somebody the finger and that person doesn't know what it means, then what makes it bad?" His father started to say something, then stopped and reconsidered. "That's a good point," he remarked. "There's nothing inherently bad about it. It is only bad because everyone has agreed it's a bad thing to do. I suppose it could just as easily have been made to mean something good, like good luck." "Or, 'I love you,'" said David. "Right," his father said. He smiled, but then his face turned serious again. "Even if your mother didn't know what it meant, you did. You weren't thinking good luck or 'I love you.' You meant it as an insult." "I didn't mean anything," said David. "I was just testing her to see if she knew what it meant. It was like an experiment." His father appeared to mull that over. "Who made it up?" asked David. "I don't know." "Somebody had to," said David. His father nodded. "I guess so. And then when he gave people the finger, he'd have to explain what it meant. Otherwise, no one would care." "They might think it meant good luck or 'I love you,'" said David. His father laughed. "Right," he said. "And then those people would give other people the finger and they'd have to explain it too. But now we live in a world where people have been cursing and insulting each other for so long that we can do it without having to bother to explain it." He smiled sadly. "Aren't we lucky? I wonder how long people have been doing it," said David. "Quite a while, I suppose, for everyone to know about it." "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa would know what it means?" "I'm sure they do," said his father, "but I never experimented on them." He smiled. So did David. "But what if there is one person who doesn't know what it means and you do it to her or him? Is it bad? Elizabeth doesn't know what it means. If I went into her room and flipped it off, would it be bad? I don't know. I know I wouldn't like it if I was taking her for a stroll and somebody came along and said, "Hey, Elizabeth," and then flipped her off. He thought a moment. But would that be because he was offending Elizabeth or because he was offending me? I guess Elizabeth would find out what it means someday. I guess Elizabeth will find out what it means someday, said David, just like Mom. It seems so hard to believe. It's sad. His father nodded. Why don't you go and apologize to your mother, he said. David started toward the door. David, his father called after him. He turned around. His father flipped him off. Good luck, he said. David flipped off his father and said, I love you. David's mother was quite delighted to find out it was just an experiment. She was flattered that David didn't think she knew what it meant. And that's the end of chapter 7.